Hello, welcome to Making Photos. I'm Ian M. Butterfield. What's a flowerscape and how do you create one? Well, that's a question I answered in a live stream a while back. So let's jump over and join the live stream at the point where I'm explaining how you create them. Okay, let's move on to our theme for the night, which is flowerscapes. So what is a flowerscape? Well, a flowerscape is really a scene that's made up almost entirely of flowers. That's the basic definition of a flowerscape. And what do they look like? Well, I mean, typically it's multiple flowers and it fills the frame with flowers. That's what I would mean by a flowerscape. And I'm also going to look at some other suggestions for photographing flowers as well as part of this, but I'll do it in two halves. I'll look at the flowerscapes now, and then a little bit further on I'll come back and we'll look back at how you photograph flowers and give you some advice and tips on that and things to think about when you're doing flower photography. So, right, this is typically a flowerscape. It's technically a flowerscape. It's an image that's just consisting of flowers. It's not brilliant. We can do much, much better than that. We can do something like that. Now, this is more what I mean by flowerscapes, where we've got shallow depth of field with this foreground and background bokeh, this out of focus areas to the image, but we've got one part of the image that is in sharp focus up there. So another view might be something like this. And that item that's in sharp focus, we refer to as being the hero within the image. And that's what you need to think about when doing a flowerscape shot. You need to find your hero. So in this image, now can I do it with the pointer? Yes, my pointer's a little bit more responsive on here. My hero's around this sort of area of the image, the flowers there, with the foreground out of focus and the background out of focus. So that's what you're looking for, using a shallow depth of field to isolate one flower and let the foreground and background go out of focus. So let's show you a few more on this here with some harebells, and quite clearly our hero is this one on the 1/3 line on there. Where the others going out of focus in the background, a little bit in the foreground as well, but we've got one image, one flower that our eye is drawn to. That's our hero for the shot, and that's the sort of thing we should be looking for when creating a flowerscape shot. So for example, again with this one, our hero is right on the back of this clump that's in the foreground, which gives us this lovely bokeh effect in the background. And maybe I should have taken cropped it in just slightly on there, because really we ought to be just the flowers on the shot. Now here's a slightly more unusual one, because this one works in the opposite, through 90 degrees, because our foreground is here and our background is on the side. It's because these ferns, this grass, was coming out of the side of a building, but we've still got this same effect of a flowerscape, the out of focus background, the slightly out of focus foreground, and the sharper midground on there. Again, similarly with this cotton grass. Now this is one way of doing it. If you go with sort of f8, your standard sort of shot, you get something like this. Yes, you've got out of focus in the foreground, you've got out of focus in the background, but it's a bit meh on there. We can do better than that. So this version of it at f2.8, you can see this. I much prefer this with that area of bokeh, that blurring right out into the distance on there, a little bit in the foreground, right in this corner. I should have got a little bit lower down. And that's the other tip with this, is don't shoot from high up looking down on the flowers, shoot along and through them, and that gives you that depth of field, that out of focus foreground, that out of focus background on the image. Let's look at how we photograph individual flowers. This isn't a true flowerscape, although I've kept the title of flowerscapes throughout on this, just for consistency. Shallow depth of field, and it's using this idea of keeping just one of the, in this case, teasels, so dead flowers, in focus, and allowing the other two to drop out of focus. I think that makes the image work that way. That it gives a depth to the image by doing it like that. And here, another case of isolation where we're isolating one single bluebell. I've stuck it on a third line. I've used a very shallow depth of field. And again, as I was saying earlier, if you're shooting with a compact camera or shooting with an iPhone, you'll find this quite tricky to achieve on there, to isolate with the depth of field. But if you can control your depth of field, shallow, which is basically the widest aperture or the smallest f number to do it, you can get this sort of effect. Now, it's worth noting there were other bluebells in this scene, but I chose to frame it in such a way that only one bluebell was in the shot. Now, thinking about flowers, one of the things we tend to do when we're shooting flowers, we try to get just about the whole flower in, as I've done here with this daisy. And I've got the shallow depth of field. So where do I focus? I focus on the center of the flower with that. But actually, we don't necessarily need to have the whole flower in there. Because sometimes if you go in tighter, it's actually a stronger composition. Yeah, I'm still focusing on the center, but cropping off the tips of the flower, the petals all the way round, can give quite a strong composition. Because what have we achieved here? We've now got lead-in lines all drawing us into the center of the flower. So that gives us a much I think a stronger composition than the previous image that I showed on there. Again, sometimes you just get lucky when you're doing flower photography. The bee arrived as I was focusing on here. Now, I think I liked the eyes in focus on this. Didn't quite manage it, but it's nice to see the veins on the wings of the bee, and you can see all the sort of nectar or pollen that it's gathered on its hind legs there, the big orange clumps of it. Which I'm quite pleased with on that. Right, filling the frame entirely. I said just cropping edges of it, but let's go completely. And when you do something like this with a rose, we were talking earlier about finding the hero in your shot. Well, it's no longer a hero flower, it's a hero petal, and mine's here round the 1/3 line on this side. That's my hero petal round there, and that gives something to focus on, and the eye comes out to see the sea of pink on there. So don't be afraid to come in really close with your flower photography. Now, another thing, this is what I was saying about the square crops and how square crops really can work with these sort of circular flowers. So here we have a cactus dahlia, it was called, but does it have to be in colour? Now, we think of flower photography and we always think of the colour of the flowers, but actually, sometimes black and white can be just as effective, if not more so. And I prefer the black and white version for this, because it all then becomes about the tones, the light and dark of the image on there. So let's show you a couple more. Stillwater Becky dahlia. Again, I've come in really tight on it, and I've created this almost filling the frame effect. So we've got an arc over the top, this shape over here, and then cropped off at the bottom. It's nice in colour, but when it's in black and white, it becomes about the texture of the flower, and the texture shows up much more in the black and white on there. So I really like the effect on that. And another one, this one, because of it being yellow, I chose to leave everything up on the bright end of it, and with the black and white conversion, even the red orange, I chose to make them quite light, so it's high key texture image. Again, filling the frame, it becomes a pattern, an abstract. Always think about putting the camera down below and looking up. We see the world from above looking down, but if you put the camera below and look up, you get a much more different view, and it causes the viewer to go, oh, I don't normally see the world like that. So consider doing worm's eye view when shooting flowers. And of course, if you can get the dew on there, the early morning dew, it just makes the flower that little bit more interesting to look at in the image. And of course, if you're like me, don't get up early in the morning, you can always think about using a plant sprayer to do it instead, which is what I did there. I hope you found that tutorial helpful. If you did and want to share your flowerscape images, why not upload them to my Facebook group? The link to it is down below in the description. And if you upload your images there, I can leave you a comment on them and give you some feedback. Now, if you want to learn other skills which will take your photography to the next level, I might suggest looking at this playlist here. There's lots of useful techniques on there which will really help you. And the video down here on photographing sunsets you will find particularly helpful. Until next time, thanks for watching and keep making great photos. Bye for now.